Hi everyone, it's Jerry. Norway Chess 2015 just started. In round 1, we had Maxime Vachier-Lagrave playing as white against Levon Aronian. Let's have a look at it. Maxime opening with d4, Levon replying knight f6. We see a queen's gambit declined in this one. To be a bit more exact, the Ragozin variation. White clarifying the center. White pins the knight, getting on with some development here. The bishop's given a kick first. Knight d7, connecting knights. This is a way that black may one day get out of this pin. Moving the pawn, let's say, striking in the center, and then getting off of the diagonal. Following up, we have e3, and something much more direct, g5, breaking the pin immediately, weakening some squares along the way. One of the most committal moves in chess, g5, g4, weakening those kingside squares. So, bishop g3, what's the idea now? It's to put that knight to use. Centralizing the knight, putting pressure on c3, the pinned piece, and also the bishop. How to follow up? Queen c2 is played, defending c3, and now in comes h5. Looking to trap the bishop. Basically trapping the bishop. e5 is available, that's only temporarily available. It'll be kicked or guarded with f6. So what to do? In the game it was h3. Not the only move. h3, h4 is a move. Also bishop d3, which gets pretty crazy. In the game it was h3, and now this allows black to induce several weaknesses on the white side. First, capturing on c3, damaging the queenside structure. This won't be a good home for the king. And now capturing the bishop, white having to take away from the center. And now this is weak. And these guys are doubled. It's just a positional nightmare on the white side. Looking from a structural standpoint, I know when I first reviewed the game, I'm looking at this structure and I'm like, I don't want to play on the white side here. This is just a matter of taste, though. For me, I like to play within a nice structure, one without any weaknesses. But when you look at the other factors that are present, where is the compensation? Well, white has a slight lead time-wise, and white will also have better piece activity. This will soon be revealed. When we consider where exactly is the black king going to go, we can be pretty confident it will be the queen side. What will black need to do in order to do that? In order to get the king to safety on the queen side, because it's just too weakening over here on the king side, he's going to have to move the knight. And when he does, this white knight on f3 will soon hop into that beautiful square on e5. It'll be a very strong piece. White is going to have good piece play as compensation. If you're not a fan of this structure on the white side, let me just throw out one other idea that's available. Well, let me point out another option that's available. It's knight to d2 at this point here, and this is not allowing this idea of h5 and h4 trapping the bishop. If you're doing this, well, for one, you take here, and now you could play h4, and the bishop's maintained. Okay, so knight to d2, this gambits a pawn, but as compensation, white yet again will have good piece activity and a perfectly fine structure. Takes, black is up a pawn, but piece activity. There's also a lead time-wise for white. h4 looking to open up the position. One of the moves here by the computer is to keep the position closed, give back the pawn. But if you want to hang on to the pawn, you're going to have to allow this rook to have now some activity. Both rooks working, bishop working. Bishop d3 is being called out for follow-up moves, getting out of the pin. Knight to e5, good pieces and a good structure, but you're down a pawn. It's one of those positional sacrifices, positional lines, gambiting a pawn, but having, again, a good structure, piece activity. It's another one to look into. It certainly would be my choice here on the white side to go in for that knight to d2 move. But, okay, queen c2 is on board. We have this structure here and the as mentioned compensation, time-wise and piece activity for white. Okay, knight to b3 is the follow-up. Getting on with some more development. Bishop to d3, g4. Takes, bishop takes, queenside castle. Okay, this is where the king will reside. Double isolated pawns now on the g-file. But, again, after queen e7, in comes that knight. Very strong. White is fully developed here, and already is throwing the first punch and starting to look towards an initiative here, right? We might say that white already has some initiative, throwing the punches. Black is having to react. And what exactly to do about f7? Not too many choices. Bishop e6, running in reverse to defend. And now what? That ever so important question, now what? How to follow up? How exactly would you assess this position? What would you do if you were playing on the white side here? If you'd like to, go ahead and pause the video, see what move you would come up with. I'm not saying that there's some brilliancy here, but feel free to pause the video, see what you would come up with here, and go for it. Okay, the move here, nothing flashy. Bishop to f5. If you came up with that idea, great. It's very important to recognize in a position what is holding your opponent's side of the board together. This bishop has an important job to defend f7. He's what we might call the glue of the position, and so it makes sense to get rid of this piece here. Look to, let's say, deflect a piece away from its defensive duty. So bishop f5 is on board. The knight now returns back to d7. He's no better. The knight on b6 is no better than the knight on e5, so it makes sense to eliminate these pieces, or a piece that's in your position. Knight to d7 it is, challenging that knight. And now we have e4. Very sensible. White has that lead in development. Black is still uncastled. White wants to welcome pawn exchanges, open up the position, open up, to be a bit more exact, the e-file, so that a rook can cause some problems to the black side. There are two pieces of greater value than the rook on the e-file. So we have now knight takes knight, and now a very important point, not the recapture of the knight, but instead e takes d5. This is very important. Going with pawn takes knight allows black to simply castle, and it's black who's already the better side. Safer king. Not down any material here. How are we looking? 6 pawns for black, 6 pawns for white, and I don't really see where there's any sort of compensation here with this immediate recapture on e5. It's very important. White does not do that. In fact, with this capture, you know, this pawn structure I was saying earlier was bad on the white side. Capturing like this, I mean, how many more isolated pawns do you want on the white side? So it's important that this is the move played first. These two pieces are still hit, both with pawns, and there's no saving the knight. If bishop takes bishop, we simply recapture, and this knight can't go too far, because if he goes out of the way, we have this pin going on the e-file. Let's say on knight here, rook a to e1, knight e3. This allows queen to f4. This knight will be picked up, and going in for this variation, well, it's just not going to work. The queen is the far dominant piece when compared to the two rooks. So, important point, first capturing on d5. Black gets on with castling. Pawn takes bishop. Pawn takes pawn. The bishop's attacked. Very fine move here. Just getting on with more development. Rook a to e1, ignoring this threat, putting pressure on the knight. He still can't move because e6 will collapse, and black is really on their heels from here on out for sure. These last handful of moves, this sequence here with white breaking in the center, that time was put in. The lead in development that white had was put to good use. e4, opening it up, capturing on d5, capturing on e6, and now taking advantage of this pin. Pawn takes bishop, rook takes knight, and it's white who is clearly in the driver's seat, having an extra pawn at this point. It's not the brightest of pawns. It's not the healthiest of pawns that white has. Double isolated G pawns. There is still some imbalance with, the king positions. White's castled on the king side, black is queen side. But look at these fantastic rooks. Both are incredibly active. Both are posted on black side of the board. Another pawn is soon to be picked up. And it's one, that's a threat that you really cannot parry. White up a pawn at the moment, but soon to be up another pawn, because there are two threats here. If you, let's say, do the move like this, there are ideas like this, attacking the queen, looking to crash through on a7. So black gets on with king to b8, defending against these ideas. White scoops up the h pawn. It's now up 2 pawns, and let's see how exactly to go ahead and convert this ending on the white side. You don't have the nicest of shelter. White doesn't have the nicest of shelter here on the king side, so we have to be a bit delicate. This queen could maybe at some point give some perpetual. Let's see how exactly to convert this. King h2, getting out of any, let's say, diagonal checks or rank checks. These 2 pawns, while doubled, they will shelter the king from rank checks and diagonal checks. It's only the file checks that white has to be a bit concerned about, and the rook is there to watch out for any of that. So what do we do in this type of an ending? Well, for one, the queen, she's a very powerful piece. We would really like to get her centralized, and that's exactly what we see. Queen to d5, very strong post, hitting in all directions. Pressure on b7, defensive g2. I think the primary one is this one right here, not allowing, let's say, rook to g8 and putting pressure on any squares near the white king. So very strong position for the queen. Got a4 in, queen to d3, the pawns advance a little bit more. a5, rook h4, queen c3, and now it's white who starts to march this pawn. He is passed. It opens up this diagonal, but white is maintaining control over this one, having the edge and never really letting it slip. Queen e4, or queen to e1 was hitting h4, the rook was hit. And now there's pressure here, so queen to c1 looking for these checks. Queen e5 still staying very well centralized, defending against the diagonal checks and also throwing a punch. This does give up the pawn, queen to c4, but this g pawn continues to march. g5 it is. White is trading. The rooks are off, and we're into this queen ending where white is just going to be the faster side. We have b5 just to get this guy running. He's now passed. We'll have 2 other pawns promoting here. These queens will soon trade. b6 is an interesting move here. Looking to open up the king position a little bit. We have queen to e5, threatening mate in a few. If black is promoting, it's a mate in 4 with takes, check, check, and then checkmate. So you have to defend against that point. Takes, and then getting on with pushing. We get into this ending here. And one other series of checks on the white side. And before white goes forward with marching their king or pawn, getting the queen to a nice post in this position. Speaking earlier about having the queen centralized, this queen is pretty well centralized right here, and also close to the white king, which means that when there are going to be some checks against the white king, the queen will have a better chance of blocking the checks in many cases. So this is a fine home for the queen before white finally decides, okay, you know what, it's time to get my king working along with the pawn, and so that's now set into motion. We just go a few more moves, and it's, well, not long before black resigns. In fact, after this move here, move 59, queen to f4, black ends up resigning. There's no way white is going to allow some perpetual check. Black knows it's it's very unlikely that that's going to happen, that white will allow a perpetual. There's 2 pawns that can be shielding against those checks, and slowly white will march another pawn up and promote. And there's always ideas, again, if the black queen is checking, the queen is there to block a check, and maybe even in some cases deliver a check back to the black king, and trading queens, of course, will result in a win for white. It would be a 1 king and pawn ending. So I found this one, again, to be an interesting game. Again, what struck me was the structural side of things, allowing this structure on the white side, just kind of going real quick here. This point, allowing this capture on c3 and g3, playing within this structure, but having the compensation in form of time and piece activity. Do know, again, that there is another option of knight to d2, going in for that gambit line. I found it quite interesting, this game. Also, where exactly can black improve? This isn't to say that, going in for what black did here was bad, because I think another point to really think back on, when both players, it's not just the player who's going to look back, the player who lost who's going to look back at the game. Maxime is going to look back on this game and consider what can black have done better. Both players will look back, and I think this is also a point where Levon will think to himself, you know what, maybe the decision to deploy the knight over here on the queen side wasn't as good. And, I could say this a bit more confidently, of course, because I'm reviewing this game with a computer. I have that as, that's my friend here when I'm going through games here. So that's backing up some of the things that I'm saying right now. Instead of knight to b6, an alternative would have been knight to f6. And I'm a bit more drawn to this move, not just because the computer is suggesting this deployment. It's one of the moves that's being suggested. But when you look at it, there are weaknesses over here. Black, can anticipate probably the king side castling, the white king castling on the king side over here, and the knight kind of just lingering around where the king is going to be. Maybe not a bad idea. Focusing on e4. In the game, what did he end up doing? If we look back, he played to b6 and then returned back to d7 to challenge the knight, right? Just going a few more moves in. Eventually, okay, he went to b6 and then he's coming back to challenge the knight. He could maybe do that by playing into the g4 square. For example, on knight to f6, this gives up a pawn if white really wants to go for it, and it's not really something I think I would be going in for, just because of the activity that black is now getting. Rook to g8, if the knight moves, you're getting g3. h4, look at the weakness on g4. This knight here can go to g4 at some point to watch over e5, and, well, he's just a tremendous piece here on the g4 square. e3 is hit. He's going to be a difficult piece to work around, that's for sure. So it's just something, you play these games, you review it, you see where you can make improvements. Both players are going to go back over it. If Levon would want to play this structure again, I think this would be another move that would certainly be looked into at the very least. So, feel free to leave any comments to this video as usual. I hope you got something out of it, and I'll catch you in the next video. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.